A couple of weeks ago, we at CHS had our what we call our spiritual emphasis week, and we walked through this Luke 5 passage over 5 sessions. In the 6th session, we got to do this worship response time. And I had a buddy of mine from Ontario come out. He plays in a band called Caves, and he led us through this a bit more charismatic experience than we're used to around here. And it was a beautiful night. And at some point, he asks us to pause and to think and to listen. And he kept playing. He just said to listen, that the Lord probably has a word for you. The Lord's wanting to say something, and let's just pause and open our ears. And for me, I'd been speaking that week, and this whole last 3 months has been fairly hectic, and has been kind of a sprint, one after another. And it was one of the first times I had been prompted to stop and to listen in the middle of some chaos. And I was a little frustrated with some logistics around the week. I had just had the tables turned a bit. I was going to speak, the next weekend, and they had just asked me to change my topic to sexual impurity with a bunch of high school kids from BC. So that was a shift from my Jesus loves you and he says these things about you. So I was wrestling with a number of those things, and so as I'm there in the midst, waiting and listening, the Lord just plainly says, "Trust me." He says, "Trust me." It's one of these phrases that we sing in all of our songs and say all the time, and seems like, of course we trust Jesus. That's why we're here. But for me, it was something just brand new in the midst of a chaotic season. For him to say, none of this surprised me. All of this was intentional. Just trust me. I've put you here. You've listened well. You were called. Trust me on this. And it stopped me, or it at least slowed me down from complaining too much about what was going on. And it helped me remember. It helped me recenter a little bit on the fact that even in the midst of these storms and these annoying seasons of life where it seems like things are just dumping on us and we can't seem to gain momentum forward, that these things aren't surprising the Lord. There's a rapper, spoken word artist named Jackie Hill Perry, and she has a song called "I Just Want to Get There." And if this was High School Chapel, I'd play you the video because that's what we do in High School Chapel. But I won't. We don't have time for that. She says this though over and over again. Her chorus, she opens up with the chorus and it says, "God, you're making me better. God, you're making me better, and you choose to do it however, whenever, wherever." God, you're making me better, and you choose to do it however, whenever, wherever. And she walks into talking about affliction and pain and this aspect of sin that has been in her life, and she references Romans 7, talking about how she does what she doesn't want to do, and she doesn't want to do what she does, and she comes back to this chorus again that you're making me better through this, and you choose to do it however, whenever, wherever. She goes into the second verse and starts talking about the early days of marriage and how the fairy tale wore off pretty quick and fighting all of a sudden happened, and real quick there was a pregnancy and their lives were not supposed to go this way, and all of a sudden she's face to face with the fact that the potter has chosen to shape the clay in a different way than she had thought it was going to be shaped. And she comes back to this chorus of "God, you're making me better, and you're choosing to do it however, wherever, whenever." When I came here about 11 years ago now, that's why there's gray in the curls now. There was none then. It looked the same though. I was skinnier. When I came about 11 years ago, I came for 2 reasons. One, I was at a different school, and Marv Penner came to that school to teach and sat me down and said, "What are you doing here? Come to Briarcrest." I thought, are you allowed? Are you allowed to do that? But okay, he made a good point. I thought, I grew up with his daughter, and I was from around here, went to CHS and stuff, and I thought, okay, that makes sense. The second reason why was because I thought maybe I'd have a chance to intern with Youthquake. I had worked with Youthquake in high school and thought maybe if I came back and finished my degree here, that I could do that. And my second year, I got that chance to intern under Kevin. And as we went into that year, I was so thrilled to be able to use all this useless information I have about Christian music in my head, this fascination that I have, and this hobby that takes up so much of my time that most of the people around me figure was fairly a waste of time at that point in my life. I was finally going to be able to use this for good, and so I went on this mission of convincing Kevin that this hilarious and wild group that had just released their first album named Family Force 5 was worth booking. And this was in 2007, and I successfully convinced him of that. And I remember clearly Kevin looking at me going, "Are these guys foolish, or are they fools?" And I was like, I don't know how to answer that. And then in my head, I'm like, is he thinking that of me? Probably at that stage. And we got through that year, and I was so excited. Didn't get through that year. We got through that decision. We chose that. We booked another headliner, and got almost to announce these things. And the Lord pulled Kevin aside and said, "Hey, I think we need to go with no concert bands. I think we need to bail on these." And Kevin led our team into that call. And I remember it was first about the main headliner, and I remember the Lord. Us realizing that this was for real and that we needed to do this. And so we pulled the plug on the first contract. And I remember coming to grips with the fact that the thing that I was most proud of being a part of this and the stamp that I was able to make on this probably needed to be pulled too. And I don't know if Kevin had already canceled the bands. It wasn't my call at that stage. But I remember coming into Kevin's office and telling him, "Hey, I really think that if we cancel these other guys, I think we need to probably pull the plug on Family Force 2. And I sensed a wave of relief from him on my enthusiasm towards that. And that was a moment for me in which I was brought into this stark reality that what this event was for, what this place was for, my role in youth ministry, all these things that I kind of liked about youth ministry really were on the fringe of what was crucial. I don't think there could have been a better experience for me to wake up to the reality that kids need Jesus. They don't need this. They don't need Family Force 5. They need the gospel. And so for me, there was this shaping moment in the midst of this. This sucked. It was a terrible month, and it was hard to sell our I Heart YQ t-shirts after we just pulled the plug and all these disappointed faces around here. But God shaped me and lots of us in some really important ways that year. The next year, I got the chance to intern again, and this year was going to be a bit different. We were able to enter into concerts a little bit differently. We got to bring Family Force 5 that year, and for me, I had planned my whole Briarcrest experience around interning with Youthquake. So I had done 11 classes my first year. I had done 6 that first year of interning, and I had 11 left to do at the end of my degree, and hadn't planned on doing a second year. I also got engaged just before this year started, and we were going to get married right at the end, right after grad. So I had the wedding to prepare with Cheryl, or at least I had Cheryl to help while she was preparing the wedding. And we had Youthquake on the go, and I took 5 classes that first semester and a DL. I was going to span the year. And I remember getting this note in my box from Academic Services saying, "Hey, there's been a little bit of mix-up. Come see us." And I'm sure by my fault, we had missed the fact that 2 of my classes that I transferred in didn't fit in my program. And so I wasn't going to be able to graduate doing 11. And life was in process though. We were going to get married. I had a job lined up. We were moving on. So I said, well, let's just throw them in that second semester. So I ended up with 13 classes that year, and that semester, you can ask any of the professors, was never known for my academics. And we walked through that year with much in the boat. I felt at many times, it was also Cheryl's first year teaching at CHS, and we felt like the boat was not our relationship, but in life we were overloaded in many ways. One hilarious point was that one of the classes I had to add was a senior theology class. The only one I could fit into my schedule was senior theology seminar with David Gretzky, and I was a youth ministry major and had never taken anything above a 100 level, and theology class. And so I show up in this class, and we're reading through just theologian after theologian, just their prolegomena. I don't even know if I'm saying that right still. But that's all we were doing. And you had 2 assignments in the whole class. You had to present and argue something about this theologian's prolegomena. And my first one, it was all that I could do to just try to understand what was being said in these papers. And I got up and presented, and I handed it in, I got my paper back, and David was very gracious and gave me a modest mark and said, hey, next time I need you to make an argument of some kind. That was the point. And so I tried the next time, and I passed. I'm not sure. Ironically, that was my best GPA that semester. Ironically, that youth quake was incredibly fruitful. We got to grad, and we had a brilliant experience. And we got to our wedding and had a wonderful ceremony right here and reception afterwards. We got through. That year was categorized by all kinds of craziness. It shouldn't have lined up. And there's something that was always said, it was that this is so annoying. What I want to say this morning is that God is using this to shape you. And what I mean by that a little bit more is that these following statements, the subject of these statements, I can't believe I have to do this. Whose idea was this? Why do I have to do this again? Once this is done, I'm out. The last time I do anything like this, I just have to get through this and I'll be fine. This is useless. This sucks. This is what God is using to shape you. This is what God is using to make us better. These moments are the moments where we are softest and most vulnerable and most in recognition, most brought face to face with the fact that we need Jesus day in, day out. That we can't do this alone. And that actually that our lives aren't meant just to serve ourselves. That we're meant to walk with. In this passage in Luke, we see a few really great things from Peter. In chapter 4, or in verse 4, he says, when they had finished speaking, he said to Simon, now go where it's deeper, let down your nets. And I'm reading from the NLT here. Master, Simon replied, we worked hard all last night and did catch a thing. But if you say so, I'll let these nets down again. When I got that message from this camp about, hey, the theme's on sexual impurity, I took the dog for a walk, as I do when I'm not sure what to think. And I remember looking up and waiting for the Lord to kind of say something about this. And I remember, and I just said, trust me, eh? That's great. And I wasn't too sure where to go with it. But I was like, if you say so, let's start making these up, right? I suspect Peter in this moment where he's like, just out all night, just cleaned his nets, boat just put away, Jesus wants to preach, and I'm sure that Jesus is like, hey, let's go fish. And Peter's like, I'm exhausted, it's been out all night, this lake is empty, I know that, you're not a fisherman, I heard you preach, but I've never seen you fish. And he gets out there, but Peter shows this willingness, right? This posture of willingness. That even though it's illogical and even though he knows better and even though it doesn't seem like what his parents would tell him is the right thing to do, he says to Jesus, all right, if you say so, we'll go do it. And by that willingness, they end up in this situation that is overwhelming. That the nets are ripping, the boats are sinking, they have fish all over them. I'd take Miracle Month over fish all over me any day of the week. It's disgusting. But his willingness led him into this situation where he was brought face to face with the fact that he couldn't do this, but with the fact that Jesus was who he said he was. And it developed in him this intense humility. And we see in Peter this posture of humility here, where he says, you got to get away from me. I am too sinful for you to use me, for you to be close to me like this. And Jesus says, don't worry, don't be afraid. I'm going to make you now a fisher of men. And in that response, we see this posture of commitment out of Peter. That he was willing, it became overwhelming. He didn't seem like he didn't think he was good enough for this or that he shouldn't be doing this. He tried to pull out. Jesus said, don't be afraid. He said, come follow me. I'll make you fishermen. And Peter followed. And his friends followed. Peter gets the glory here, but most of this passage is the group. Those sons of Zebedee, they get the short end of the stick on this one. It's this posture of willingness that leads to some overwhelming situations, which develops a posture of humility, which leads Peter to this posture of commitment, of going and trusting. And I think what I want to say is in the middle of this chaotic storm that can be November, that there are moments where the potter is shaping you. These moments for me in that third year and in the moments where we were counseling the bands and some of the most chaotic moments of my life were defined by chaos, by frustration, by confusion, by being annoyed all the time and tired all the time. And yet those were the moments where God showed up to shape me in the greatest ways that I can remember. And so I relish a good overwhelming week. My wife and daughter don't relish when that happens to me, but I anticipate that. I like that. That's actually motivating for me. If those moments happen day in, day out, all year long, it'll kill me. I understand that. I'm at the end of a long stretch, and you can see my voice is giving away, and my body's going to fall off the stage at any point. But rest is coming, right? We've had a long stretch. But for me, I planned this month out great. I was going to do spiritual emphasis at the end of October. I was going to go pop out to this camp in the middle of November, and I was going to speak here next week. And God crammed it all together. To move spiritual emphasis out a week, Michael's trip got switched, so we moved this in, and all of a sudden, you've got 11 new talks in 20 days. And that's heavy. It's chaotic. It's a little annoying, but it's good work. And I feel like the Lord has shaped me over these last 3 weeks in bigger ways than he has in the last 2 years. And this, to me, tells me that there's something good about being overwhelmed. There's something good about this posture of humility that is developed when we are taking on water and we know that we're not able to handle. But the Lord has said, trust me. To get all grown up in leadership beyond you, Bill Hybels wrote a book called Simplicity. And I was mentioning where I wanted to go this morning to Kevin Fawcett. And here's one thing. Here's just off, not on the notes. If you have a mentor here, just hang on. Hang on to him or her. Could be a girl. Hang on to your mentor. I like to collect mentors. From college on, I've just tried to collect them. They live in Texas and in BC and Ontario, everywhere, and they're all on my cell phone. And they speak into all kinds of things. Hang on to your mentors. Anyway, so all these years later, every time Kevin says something to me, the Lord's like, he's a genius. So he writes, he showed me this piece from Hybels' book. And Hybels was writing about the challenge level in our jobs. Your job being school currently right now. And it says this, under-challenged is an unrewarding situation, and it leads to dissatisfaction. Sometimes that's the goal for us, right? That we could do like 2 days of work. It was something we know how to do, and then go home and put our feet up. It's actually not what we're designed for. Appropriately challenged keeps us in control. This is like, I've got us figured out. We're running this a smooth operation. I'm sleeping well. I'm doing well. There's not really any peaks in stress or lows in whatever the low is. This is kind of just steady as she goes. This develops a fairly large sense of pride and can keep us from that posture of humility that Peter shows. Dangerously over-challenged, of course, is a recipe for disaster. This ends up being where breakdown happens. This ends up being not monitoring our gauge as well. This ends up being where we end up realizing that we've gone too far, that we are taking on too much water. But there's a fine line between appropriately challenged and extremely over-challenged, dangerously over-challenged. And Bill Hybels, as a 60-year-old pastor dude calls it appropriately challenged plus, which could use he's got a whole branding machine there. He could use a new name on that. But appropriately challenged plus is the sweet spot, he says. This is here you feel an excitement, a need for God, a need to work with your team. You're in just over your head that you must swim hard and fast, but you're not drowning. I don't think the goal is comfort. I don't think the goal is just being a good fisherman. I don't think the goal is safe, enjoyable weeks. I think the goal is trusting the Lord. And I think the Lord has called us here. And I think the Lord throws us into the deep end once in a while so we can learn how to swim hard and fast. And I think he's making us better. And I think he's choosing to do that however, whenever, wherever. And I think that sometimes as we complain about this being too much, it's good for us to remember that these are the things that shape us greatest in this life. So I don't mean to be like, hey, quit complaining. But this is a heavy week. This is a heavy 2 weeks for many of you involved in Christmas musical. This is a heavy week for high school. This is a heavy week for all of us. This is a heavy month. Let's take care of ourselves. Let's make sure we're resting. Let's make sure we're not dangerously over-challenged. But let's not settle for appropriately challenged. Let's not be scared of an overwhelming week once in a while. Because as we swim hard and fast in those weeks, the Lord shows us our capacity. He grows our character, and he fosters this posture of willingness, of humility, and of commitment to what he's called us to. It's time to go, but as you go, I'm going to play this Jackie Hill Perry song for you, and just after I pray, and as you go, if you would like, if you have time, stay and listen. It's a great song. Father, we thank you so much for calling us here. We thank you so much for the overwhelming nature of that which you call us to. And Father, we pray that you would put people around us to help us watch out for us wandering into dangerously over-challenged. But Lord, I pray that we wouldn't settle for under-challenged, and I pray we wouldn't settle for comfort and appropriately challenged. Lord, I pray that we would relish the opportunity to be overwhelmed once in a while, that we would trust you to know that you've gifted us, that you've prepared us, that you're not going to throw us into a situation where we're going to drown. Lord, that as we listen closely to you and as we trust you leading us into these weeks and these months, that none of this surprises you and that you are using this to shape us, Lord, into that which you want us to become. So give us this posture of willingness, and give us this posture of humility, Father, and that we would live our lives with this posture of commitment to you. And I pray. Amen.